Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman, and today we're going to discuss the toxicity of being certain. This comes out of some experiences, or many experiences. I've worked with many people who are certain of a lot of things, and it usually ends up being pretty toxic. Usually they're certain of themselves. But I want to start with how certainty about a design or a piece of software becomes toxic in and of itself.
Okay.
The opposite of certainty is you come to a problem and you say, okay, I don't know how to solve this problem. I'm certain it can be solved, but beyond that, how do I solve it? And the way I approach it is I make informed guesses, right? We'll go scientific method. I have theories. I can solve this problem with a message bus, or I can solve this problem with just straight RESTful APIs. And then I work to deliver something, to set up an experiment to prove that it will work or to demonstrate that it won't work. And because I'm not certain it'll work, like I think it'll work, but I'm going to do the experiment. I've got my hypothesis. I'm going to run the experiment and I'm going to analyze the results. And if it doesn't work, then I will know that I need to go do something else. And I'll have learned something about why it doesn't work.
Right.
So with my scaling work, a common thing that I will say is, this could be much better. And I will then, change code and say it'll be much better if I do this. If I take this thing got an O, an order of operations of n to the third, and I make it something that's say 2n by using caching, this should be faster. And usually it is. And sometimes it turned out that yes, it was O to the third, or it was n to the third, but it was actually like a 3. And so the difference was small enough that it was nominal. It didn't make any real difference, and the caching was more complex. And so I didn't actually achieve anything. But I measured and I moved along. And I wasn't certain.
Okay.
Um,
So, what makes it toxic?
so what makes it toxic? This is the thing that happens a lot with rewrites. And whenever you decide to bring in new technology, I think is where it gets most toxic. It's the conjunction of the two. If you say, hey, this might do better,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring in a new database. I've got a relational database, and I think a time series database is going to really make this reporting thing go so much better because it's times based, and it's going to be awesome. And you could do the experiment, right? You'd be like, okay, I'm going to test one of the series. I'm going to see how that goes, and make sure that this is going to work and it's going to flow the way I expect, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you're doing a rewrite, right, a big bang rewrite where you're going to deliver the whole thing at once, you don't know. Because you haven't thesis shipped, you don't know that your decision is going to work or not. And because you had certainty that, oh yes, the solution to my problem is a time series database. This time series database, it becomes toxic because now you're at the end of the project.
Right. Yeah. I think I've seen this in smaller cases as well, where someone would jump in and say, "Oh, I know what the problem is with this code. I'll just go it must be this area," and they'll just go ahead and try to make a change to the area, push up a hot fix, or without even really testing that it's the issue. It's just some people you run into like that. I'm confident this is the issue. And I've worked with this recently actually, and someone pushed it up and it's still broken, and I'm like, what made you think it was going to work? Like, did you just look at an area and think, okay, this just looks like a bad design and I can clean it up? Because my preferred method is like the scientific method ish, kind of how you were describing it. Scatter some timing logs in there and see if you're uncertain about which area is actually an area that's causing a slowdown in your system, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have actual data, because maybe the area you're changing is not clean code, but actually not the main issue that you're trying to solve. And so having certainty around things that you especially code that you're familiar with, without actually having any data to back it up, will
Hmm.
just lead you to making either trivial changes or changes that could make the system worse. So I'm always in favor of the data collecting method before you take any action, especially if it's projects like rewrites, like you're talking about, where you're designing. I think we talked about the Sandy Metz quote in a previous episode, but one of the quotes was something similar to like, "You will never know less about requirements than you do now. Like you can only get
Yes.
more as you go forward." So when you have a rewrite, or you have somebody who's trying to spec out a whole thing up front, um, I can see that being the toxic certainty, so to speak, because you spend so much time planning on a system that you're not really aware of, and you're putting all that feedback at the end of it instead of getting the iterative feedback from people.
Hmm.
Um, that if you're pushing that kind of process and then it flops in the end, well, that's where the toxic part of that comes from, I guess.
Right. It's worth pointing out the toxicity issue is about people and not about
Mm-hmm.
the software. So if you decide to make a big bet on time series database instead of a relational database, it's not that the database choice is toxic. It's that the decision to go for it without verifying it, which was a person decision,
Mm-hmm.
that's where the toxicity is, because this person has bet everything, and people, they hate to be wrong, and they hate to admit being wrong, and people will do wild amounts of self-justification to
Yeah.
prevent their egos from admitting that they're wrong. And part of that stems from being certain in the first place. If I go and I say, I think this will work, but let's do it, let's do an experiment and try, and it doesn't work, then I'm like, oh, well, okay. That's why I wanted to do the experiment. But if you pushed past that and said, oh, I'm just going to go straight for it, then you don't have the experiment, and now it's going to be it's going to be that person's ego on the line. Now
Yeah.
they were wrong.
And they'll double down.
Right, they will
Try to
double
find ways.
down.
Yeah. Got it.
And this doesn't have to be on a big thing either. Like I've seen toxicity in things where people are certain about things that aren't true or false. They're not Boolean. Like, to go back to an old saw, tabs versus spaces. I have seen huge arguments where different developers were certain that this was better than one way or the other, and their certainty was entirely a preference. Like,
Yeah.
their arguments, and mostly I don't care, but just the two of them were very certain that their way was the right way, and it was entirely an argument, a preference. There are arguments for both sides, and it's not something you can be true or false. You can't negate it, right? You can't negate tabs are better than spaces,
Yeah.
right? I can do a test and prove that a time series database won't work for this situation, or that it will, but I can't prove that tabs or spaces are the right code format.
Yeah. It's just strong opinions.
It's strong opinions, and that even more than the technology decisions, strong opinions masquerading as certainty can be extremely toxic.
Yeah. I'm always a fan of that quote too. Strong opinions loosely held, because you
Hmm.
need some people in the room to have enough of an opinion to not just be not doing anything, where you're just going, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to do next. Someone's like, well, how about we just try this out? But if someone's wrong about it, they have to be able to let it go, right? And that's the main thing, is if you can be certain in a moment and then change your mind based on the data provided to you without letting ego get in the way. That's the greatest way to be in a team, I think.
Right. And I don't know that, you know, even speaking for myself, I don't know that I would be my certainty, like in the tabs versus spaces argument, is
Hmm.
I am highly confident. Like whenever this beast rears its head, my answer is I don't care but we need to pick one and stick with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So my certainty is it isn't tabs or spaces, it's consistency. And I could see somebody who doesn't believe, who believes that code consistency is a bad thing, which is actually no what I've never met a developer who thought that.
Me neither.
But I'm putting it out there as a theoretic, right? I'm
Sure.
pretty certain that code consistency is a good thing. And I've never heard anybody argue the other side other than it would take too much. Well, I have heard people argue the other side that everyone should be allowed to do things the way they want. No, I don't think anybody particularly has ever argued it in terms of style guides, but in terms of design. Are we going to use this framework or that framework? And my opinion is usually I don't care, but we should use one.
Yeah.
I have heard people go the other way and being like, well, every developer should be free to make their own choices.
Yeah, I feel like that skirts. I mean, it's not like quite the everyone. No one should have any coding standards. It's just more of autonomy, like slightly separate arguments. But
Well,
anyway,
it's still an argument for certainty, though. I know I worked with one developer, a very, very good developer, who was certain about consistency and somewhat to autonomy. And his argument was, hey, if you want to change out this thing, I totally support you, but you have to change it everywhere. And people found him to be very toxic because his requirement of consistency, like you can change anything you want, but you have to make the whole code base consistent. They found that to be very toxic and they didn't want to work with him.
yeah, you have the freedom to do things exactly the way I want it done.
It was slightly different. It was, you have the freedom to do whatever you want, but it has to look the way I want it at the end.
Yeah, the false freedom.
Well, it was a real freedom. It was just a high bar of.
They were arguing the same thing. Yeah.
Well, no, it's like, it's not, you can have the car any color you want so long as it's black. It's, you can make the cars any color you want, but they all have to be the same color.
Yeah, gotcha. Either way.
Either.
In general, yeah, I think certainty. It's almost like it depends answer for coding, right? Where the only thing to be 100% true is that there's not 100% truth answer for everything.
Right.
So I have almost like a religion of doubt, so to speak, when it comes to things. So like I like leaving a lot of uncertainty and doubt and unsuredness about the project that I'm working on because it gives me the freedom to pivot easily. I can kind of plan for the unexpected. If I've already laid down everything and said this is the way it is, this is the way we want it. Even designs, for example, like you say, I know what the customer wants, and here it is in the ticket, and you don't talk about that enough, and then later you build this thing, and the customer's like, that's not what I wanted at all. You're like, well, do we have any people talking about that or poking that apart? Middle of the project.
Yeah, I'm writing that down. I love religion of certainty. We're gonna have to do an episode on that. Or sorry, a religion of doubt.
Yeah. I like doubting. Like I
No doubt.
don't find it. I don't have any. Like it doesn't. It's not painful for me to not be certain about what I'm working on, right? And I think that's the issue for a lot of people, is maybe they're not being certain to be toxic. It's just that provides them some level of comfort because they don't want to dive into something unknown. They're scared of the unknown, so they want to define as much as they can to be in control of it because it's scary not knowing. And for me, I'm like, well, let's build this thing kind of knowing mostly what the customer's getting at. And if that has to change, let's leave room for that. So let's not have such a strict, certain standard about what we're going to deliver that once the customer goes, actually, you mischaracterized what I wanted. And you're like, we can't pivot from this point. So having that a little bit of doubt each time. Are we sure we're doing the right way? Are we sure we're building this? Not to the point where we dismantle the project. We go, he's always just asking. He's always like asking me for sure about stuff. But enough to not get lost in your implementation and your own certainty, I guess.
Well, now that you've said it out loud, I wonder if there is a nexus of certainty. It's uncomfortable. Most people find it uncomfortable to be uncertain about what they're doing. And so you're saying that they may provide us false sense of certainty to relieve their anxiety. And I wonder if that also feeds into imposter syndrome, because if you're being certain about a whole bunch of things that you really know or suspect aren't true or you shouldn't be certain about, that might leave you feeling like an imposter, like you're creating this front
Yeah.
of certainty that like this is the way to go, and it's because I'm certain this is the way to go, and that's why we should do it. And now I can feel good about arguing it, but deep down I'm not certain, and so now I feel like an imposter.
I bet you there is some overlap in that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I rarely feel like, imposter syndrome is not a thing that I suffered with over the years, and also I was never certain of anything.
Yeah. It's I do think there's a certain degree of that, the overlap, where like if you younger in my career, I was certain of some things
Hmm.
because I didn't know any better, and I was like, okay, this is the way you build software, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't really the way you built software. It was just the way I learned, and so once I met people who did it differently, then I did have that reflection of like, oh, my entire career thus far, I thought this was the way things are being done, and all the professionals around me say I've been doing it incorrectly, or you know, this is a better way rather.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you have to come to terms with that, then you do have that imposter syndrome thing of like, how did I even get this job? It looks like this entire time I've been delivering it and making ends meet with this particular flow that I was doing, but actually it's not really the way people prefer to do it. And that, yeah, and I agree. Like the higher up you are, the more comfortable you tend to be with uncertainty. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Certainly, executives need to be comfortable with ambiguity.
yeah.
And thinking about it, the most toxic executives I've ever worked with were very certain on a lot of things.
There's probably a benefit to it. Like you don't want a leader to waffle back and forth and be like, I hope that's the case. And you're like, dude, you're leading the company. Just be certain about it. So you kind of want certainty in those cases where where you don't need to necessarily know the uncertainty about it because that will leave you worried. This doesn't work in every case.
Well, part of that, I think, would be the certainty on things that aren't their domain anymore. Like, I want the
100% sure.
CEO to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
certain of the vision, the strategy, what's going on in the company, but let's go down a level, the CTO, because I see this a lot in my career is CTOs who came up from programmers and will still be like, oh, well, here's a problem and here's a good way to solve it. And then they'll push a design.
Hmm.
It's like, well, whoa, 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 whoa. You certain you want to do that? Because you don't know the system very well anymore.
Yeah.
All that code you wrote is gone.
I'm certain this is the way it should work. That's
Yeah.
not the way it does.
Yes.
All right. I think we've waxed poetic enough.
Yeah, I'm certain of it. All right. Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.